boy, I'm gonna be like 100.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm not gonna be like this decrepit old man when my kids graduate.
Welcome to episode 1 of the Josh Brooks podcast. It's been a long way getting here. This has been a pipeline dream for a long time, and even just building a studio has been a process. And in the studio today, we have, I don't know if I pronounce it right, Travis Nicholson?
Absolutely.
Like nickel like the coin?
Yep, nickel like the coin.
Travis has been in youth ministry for a long time.
Oh, I feel old.
I know, yeah. Hey, you got gray hairs, but I'm bald, so...
That's fair.
Gray hair better than no hair.
That's fair.
Travis and I actually, we almost started a podcast. We thought about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one could say we did start it.
Yeah, I guess so.
I mean, we probably had, 5 or 6 episodes. And then life got busy.
Yeah. I think around that time, Facebook Live was like just coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting to see how stuff like that has changed. Because Facebook Live was big.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it was, I don't know if it was the first of its kind, but before that, other platforms were harder to get on. But just being able to go on Facebook and go live was a big deal. And now it's...
The only thing I can think of that was before Facebook Live, I can't even remember what it was called. It was like Periscope or something.
Yes, dude, yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I think it was like Twitter's version of Live.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Facebook Live really upped the game and the ante of being able to interact with a live audience.
Yeah. I remember when Periscope first came out, all the parents were like concerned that people would be like killing people on Periscope. And as far as I know, it didn't happen. Maybe it did, but...
Yeah. I do know, like, there have been shootings caught on live, but not like...
Sure, yeah.
Not on purpose. Not like, hey, I'm going live.
Yeah.
But just, by chance. And honestly, it's helped catch a lot of these people. So if anything, it's a good thing.
Yeah. I do wonder, like, if there's a certain extent that stuff like that happening kind of push people off live platforms or people stop putting money into it.
Yeah, potentially. For sure.
Yeah. So, when did you start in youth ministry?
Well, I guess it depends on who you ask.
Mm-hmm.
I would say I started serving in youth ministry as a teenager, right? So it just depends on what part of start you count. So started serving in youth ministry as a teenager. I gave my first sermon at my youth group when I was 17 years old.
That's incredible. That's awesome.
And so the sermon was not awesome. But everything else was awesome.
Right.
I'm pretty sure there's like heresy in there and all this stuff. But, I learned from it. And so 17 was when that started. Really getting serious about wanting to be in the ministry around the age of 21.
Cool.
But I didn't get hired full time until I believe it was 22, 23. I think it was 23.
Yeah.
I was 23 years old, which now is going to be 9 years ago.
That's incredible. Wow, that's really cool. Did you go to college for any sort of youth ministry or do any training?
Yeah, so I actually bumped the college trend, right? Like, I come from a very low-income family, so the idea of any kind of college tuition was just so far beyond what we could even think.
Yeah, for sure.
And so there's this thing called Master's Commission. It's an Assemblies of God, or it was affiliated with Assemblies of God. And basically it's, hey, you don't want to pay college tuition? Come, serve with us, $7,000 a year.
That's incredible.
Give you hands-on ministry experience. There were aspects of it that were incredible, aspects of it that were not so incredible. Lessons were learned, mistakes were made. I think the biggest thing that was happening when I first went, since then they've dropped it, but your first year you weren't allowed to date.
Oh, wow.
So, which on paper actually sounds kind of cool.
Sure.
Right? It's like, hey, give up your fleshly side to pursue God. And that was kind of the idea. It was like, hey, give up a relationship for a year, pursue God, and it could go great. Well, the problem was then all of a sudden you take 17, 18, 19-year-olds, that are going through hormonal changes, put them in a giant room together and say, don't date each other. What do you think is going to happen? Like, it's not rocket science. So like I said, mistakes were made
Right.
by different people here or there. Rules were broken.
Yeah.
So there were good aspects and some aspects that needed to be changed, and from what I hear, they have been. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I did that, and that's actually what brought me up here to Waterville.
It's incredible. That's cool.
The church we were at was called Calvary Temple, now Centerpoint. Started one of these master's commissions.
Oh, cool. Oh, like they had their own program?
Yeah. They had their own program, and so I came up to help start it and be on the leadership team for that, which eventually got me hired on at the church as the youth pastor. Yeah, that's cool. That honestly, the whole dating thing, or like not dating, the first thing that came to my mind, the way you put it, was there was this TV show called The Biggest Loser. And I don't even know if it's allowed to be on TV anymore. I don't think so.
It's probably canceled, like not allowed. But they would, I think, like in the first episode, they would bring everyone in and put them in a room with like ribs and donuts and like all kinds of wonderful sweets and candy, and just like let them have at it. And everyone's like 300-400 pounds, whatever, and they just go like hard on like the sweets.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, and I feel like, oh man, like the more you tell a 17, 18, 19-year-old kid, don't do this, they're like, well, that's what I'm going to do. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm only going to do this because you told me not to. Right, yeah. I wouldn't have done it to begin with, but because you said not to, now I want to. Yeah. And that's what happened. Yeah. That's funny. I didn't have that problem when I was 17, 18, 19 because nobody wanted to date me, so it was perfect. Yeah. Oh, trust me. It turned really well. When I say mistakes were made, I don't mean by me. Like, fair enough. I had the same issue. Like, I was lucky if some of the opposite sex wanted to talk to me. That's hilarious. So no. By no means. Like, I'd say my wife was my second serious girlfriend in my entire life. Yeah. So if that gives you any idea of my lovely non-existent dating life. Right. My wife was my first real girlfriend. And let's go. And hers as well. So I was hers. I wasn't her first real girlfriend. I was her first real boyfriend. There you go. Because there wasn't a first real girlfriend. There you go. When did you and Erin meet? We met in 2014. Mm-hmm. So I believe I was 24 at the time when we met. Mm-hmm. Her aunt set us up against both of our wills. Really? Neither of us wanted to be set up. But it was like bachelor. Yeah. Her and two of her friends were in Maine visiting her aunt family. Yeah. And then her aunt invited like 7 of us guys over. And was like, hey, you guys come over. So like 7 of us guys roll up. There's these 3 single girls. Yeah. And it was like match make. Yeah. And so she's going around and be like, hey, do you know so-and-so? Do you know so-and-so? Like, I'm pretty sure she had me talk to each one of the girls and had all of us talk to them, but Aaron and I, it was so uncomfortable. So they were 4 biggest losers that didn't get girls, right? Honestly, I think I'm the only one who walked away. I'm the only one who walked away with a potential relationship. Oh, that did end up blossoming into a marriage, so. Yeah, that's incredible. Mm-hmm. We've talked before about how a lot of times, like, youth ministry is hard when you're single. Mm-hmm. I noticed, like, there was this, like, very obvious shift in, like, how much parents trusted me once I was engaged. Oh, yes. I don't know what it was. Like, I was never interested in dating my students. No. There are some really weird people out there. I'm weird in other ways, but not in that way. But then it was like, oh, you have a fiance. Of course I trust you. Absolutely. Like, oh, you're married. Of course I trust you. And now, like, with a kid on the way, it's one of these, like, oh, you have a kid. You must know everything. But, oh, you don't have kids. You must know nothing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's crazy how those little things change. And it changes the mindset of parents. It changes the mindset of pastors. Yeah. Of people in your church. Yeah. I wasn't taken seriously as a youth pastor until I got married. Mm-hmm. And even though I'm no longer quote unquote a youth pastor. Mm-hmm. I don't work at a church. Mm-hmm. I would still argue that I am still a youth pastor. But because I don't have kids, right? That has always been the quote unquote detriment. Right. The thing that stops people from fully respecting me as someone that understands teenagers. Yeah. But I don't think you need a teenager to be an expert on teenagers. Yeah. Well, I had a childhood psychology professor who said everyone is an expert at childhood because everyone was a child.
It's so true.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's sort of an ironic thing, and this is something people don't talk about a lot, like going through the experience of trying to get pregnant and Laura getting pregnant and walking through that. I heard so many stories of people who either couldn't have kids or had multiple miscarriages. And it could be because these are the circles I run at most, but there are so many people in youth ministry who have trouble having kids or can't have kids. And so it's sort of ironic and disserving that having children makes you more trustworthy in people's eyes, but so many people in those circles struggle with having children.
Oh yeah. Well, it comes from a good place, I think. I want to believe it comes from a good place.
Sure, yeah.
You know, when people are like, "Hey, so when are you gonna have a kid of your own? When are you know?"
Right.
But the reality is people don't understand. You know, part of my wife's and I's story. So we just announced that she's pregnant.
Yeah.
We're super excited.
Yeah.
Well, it's been 2.5 years that we've been trying to get pregnant, and every single time someone comes up and says, "So when are you gonna become a real dad?"
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, ouch. First off,
Right.
like I do view these students as my spiritual kids, and I do take a fatherly role, you know, in discipling them. But secondly, like you don't know what I've been dealing with for the past 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So to ask me when I'm going to have a real child,
Right.
like that hurts. And like I said, it comes from a good spot, but people don't know. And a lot of it just is birthed out of ignorance.
Right.
And we're just now, the church at least, and I think culture too, is just now getting to a spot where people are talking openly about miscarriages, openly about struggles to get pregnant, open about being barren.
Right.
You know, before it had to stay secret.
Right.
But now that people are talking about it, I don't think it'll, because most of that ignorance came from the older crowd. You know, and that's not a dig on the older crowd, but it's just to say, hey, look, they just didn't know.
Right. I think part of it, and it really is just I've said so many dumb things.
Absolutely.
To pregnant people, to elderly people, to young people, just whatever. And I think one of the issues that we see is because there are so many people choosing not to have kids for selfish reasons, that other generations will assume, oh, well, obviously, you know, Travis and Erin or Josh and Laura aren't having kids because they don't want kids.
Right.
Simply because they're being selfish.
Right.
And there are probably legitimate biblical reasons for maybe, you know, not having your own children. But just to assume that someone's doing it for the wrong reasons or they're not even trying, it does hurt.
Yeah.
And Laura and I were really blessed. It only took, a few months for Laura to become pregnant. But that is not the case with so many people.
No. And I think you hit on something too that I think some people just don't quite understand either, right? Like, so my wife and I, we've been married 7 years now, 7.5 years.
Yeah.
And we're just now having our first child. And so we got tons of people being like, you know, are you being selfish? Are you doing this because you just don't want kids?
Yeah.
But what they don't know, like I said, it comes back to ignorance. It comes back to not knowing.
Right.
And because people don't know my story, they don't know where I come from. I came from broken family after broken family after broken family. My mother and stepfather got a divorce after I moved out of the house.
Wow.
Because they didn't know each other. When they got together, they existed for us kids.
Yeah.
I was the youngest. When I moved out, they had no idea who each other were.
Sure, yeah.
So when Erin and I were dating, when we were talking about getting engaged, I asked her, you know, when do you want kids? And she's like, well, you know, I'm fine having kids whenever. I said, great, because we're not going to have them until after we've been married for 5 years.
Yeah.
And the reasoning was because I wanted to make sure that I knew my wife.
That's a great point.
Far greater than I would ever know my child. And that's not saying I'm not going to have the same love for my child, by no means. But when that child is grown, leaves the house like they're supposed to,
right,
I'm still going to know my wife.
Yeah.
And we're still going to have a marriage, and we're still going to have a relationship.
Right.
And so, you know, when people are always like, you're just being selfish, it's like, no, actually, I'm being probably selfless.
Yeah.
You know, making sure that my child's not going to have to deal with a broken marriage.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I know, Laura and I, we got married kind of later. I think I was, maybe around 28. She was around 26. And so we knew that we had to, start considering having kids. We couldn't wait, forever.
Right.
But we really wanted to take a couple of years to get to know each other, like you said. And I am looking forward to having a kid. The kids.
Absolutely.
So much. I'm so excited. I think those will be some of the best years of my life. But also those 2 years of just Laura and I getting to know each other, how we operate, like I will cherish forever because they were incredible.
Yeah.
And now I get to experience this part of life.
Absolutely. Some people are like, well, aren't you going to want your children to graduate when you're still young? And it's like, well, yeah, like obviously I still want to enjoy in such a way, we've been making strides to take better care of our bodies in such a way that when my child graduates, I can still do whatever I want to do.
Yeah.
But I've also been able to enjoy my 20s in a way that most people with kids aren't able to do.
It's so true. Yeah.
So, 6 of one, half dozen the other.
Right. Like I'll be late 40s, early 50s when our kids graduate.
Yeah.
I look at my dad. He's almost 70 years old and he works harder than I do.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
I don't know.
My dad's the same way.
Yeah, it's just I got some time left.
Yes.
Unless God has a different plan, I'm not planning to go to my son's graduation with a walker.
Right.
That's not the plan.
Right. But people think that because you don't have a child at 25.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Or 21, especially in Christian circles.
Right.
I feel like it's abnormal for us to go to be 22 and not have a kid.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Or sometimes it's like people will ask and I'm like, well, I was single at 22 and so I wasn't sleeping around. So I guess I could have had a kid, but it's probably good I didn't.
Right.
Right. Is that what you wanted?
Yeah, exactly.
You wanted me to just get a bunch of random girls pregnant so I can have kids? What is the end goal here?
Yeah, you were supposed to have a kid at 22, so do whatever you need to make that happen.
Yeah. Sorry, I forgot. Yeah, I was working a part-time job. I didn't have a girlfriend. You're right. I'm sorry I couldn't buy a $500,000 house.
Right.
I was making $10 an hour. My bad.
Yes.
Yeah, it is so funny to look at some of those trends, and it's like, oh, when I was your age, I had a house. And I was like, well, I am your age, and I can barely afford my rent.
Yeah.
So
people are so concerned because that trend is actually getting later and later now, right? So you have Christians, because I say Christians because that's really the circles we run in.
Right, yeah.
And really what happens in the church versus what happens in the world are very different. The world has for years not gotten married until later in life and had kids later in life. But the church is just now starting to get to that point. Yeah. And people are scared. They're worried because they're like, what does this mean? And it's like, it doesn't mean anything. It just means that we're going to hopefully have stronger relationships. And maybe if we're lucky, the church won't be leading in divorce rate. That would be kind of cool, right?
It's really interesting to look at it that way.
So we'll see.
I even noticed so ministry in Maine is very different from other parts of the country in a million different ways.
Yeah, right.
You being from Georgia, you see it.
Yep.
I'm only from Massachusetts, but I still see it.
Oh yeah.
And this could be a newer thing, so I got to give it some grace regionally. But something I've seen that I'd never seen before, maybe it's because I'm running in these circles, like we've talked about, is people who meet someone, who start dating, who get engaged, and who get married all within 12 months. And then, within the same 12-month period, get divorced. I cannot tell you, there are multiple stories, at least 5, that I've seen in the past 6 or 7 years. And I don't get it.
I don't either.
Understand it.
For my wife and I, we got married within 12 months. And it was one of those things where we met, but we were also long distance. So she lived in Ohio, I lived here in Maine. So we talked a lot. And so because we talked a lot, we got to know each other a lot. And so it just made things easier for us to really get deep really quick. So we knew we wanted to get married to each other fairly early on. But I think there's also a piece there that I don't want to say it's missing, because I never want to accuse anyone of this.
Sure.
I don't want to say it's missing in these other relationships, but we also really felt like we heard from God. You know, like this is the one. Right. Like this is the one you've been searching for. This is the one your heart longs for.
Yeah.
And so we just knew deep down inside this is it.
Yeah.
And then when we made those vows, we had a conversation prior to getting married. This vow isn't just something I'm going to say.
Yeah.
This vow is something I mean. You know, like, do not say those vows if you don't mean them.
Right.
Do not say those vows if you think, even if there's a bit of a doubt that this might not work out. Don't say those vows.
Yeah.
So we had that, and we had premarital counseling and all that. And so I think some of that is what's missing in some of these relationships. I know a lot that get married without any premarital counseling.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't recommend it. Because you need to understand like who you're marrying.
Oh yeah.
But also you need to understand the commitment you're making.
Right.
Our world, our culture views commitment as something of the past. It's so easy to say yes to this, but then say yes to something better when it comes along.
Right. Yeah.
And so we just have to get to a point where the world doesn't dictate what the church does, but the church is dictating what the world does. And so I think ultimately we just got to get to a point to where our commitments are our commitments, regardless.
Yeah. It's almost ironic that, like, one thing I'll always hold to is marriage is a Christian institution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, marriage was designed by God, and if you want to have something different as a non-Christian or a non-believer, cool. That's cool. In my opinion, if you want to, use marriage, okay, but you're using an institution that was designed by God.
Right.
But it's interesting that marriage is probably abused more by Christians than anyone else, even though it's an institution created by God. And I don't know what to do with that statistic. I don't know what to do with the divorce rates.
Yeah, I just think it's one of those areas, right? It's another one of those areas the church just doesn't want to confront. No one wants to rip off the Band-Aid. No one wants to expose the wound. But if you don't expose the wound, there will be no healing.
Yeah.
And so, like, we have to be able to say, look, Christians, we're bad at commitment.
Yeah.
We're bad at being married to one another. Let's do better. Like, I understand where people are coming from when it comes to issues of marriage and what pastors choose to speak on.
Right.
And we're not going to get into all of that.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think if the church focused more on the church and making sure we had everything under control and we had everything, then the world would take care of itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when we're out of whack, what's the world going to look at?
Yeah.
And why would they listen to us?
Right.
You guys have a higher divorce rate than we do.
That's a great point. Yeah. This goes out to anyone. If you're going to get married, you really need to make sure that's the right decision. And you really need to seek God on that. Because if you don't, God can fix it. God can work through it. But if you're not seeking Him before you get married, why would you seek Him while you're married?
Right. And we have to stop viewing life as a Netflix show.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not this. You're not on a dating reality show.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay? You're not going to say yes 1 minute and then the next episode say no.
Right.
Like when you say yes, that's why the Bible's clear about that. Let your yes be yes and let your no be no.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
Exactly. Something interesting you mentioned was just about like being authentic and like talking about real things. And I hope I'm getting this right, but from what I heard, the revival meetings that happened in Asbury at the university sort of springboarded off of that, of people being open and honest about their own sin, their own pain, and their own suffering. And I think there are way too many Christians who, in America specifically, have just been playing church.
Absolutely.
As my pastor puts it, just kind of, it's a thing I do, it's a thing that makes me look good, but I'm not really going to be honest about any of it.
Yeah. I think you're spot on. I've had, so for those that don't know, I get the blessing to travel and speak.
Yeah.
And it's a cool gig. It's a cool job. But with that comes being in various churches and various church cultures. Since I was a youth pastor, being transparent and vulnerable has been a key point of who I am as a person, who I am as a pastor, and who I am as a speaker. So when I preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, I can't preach it without talking about what it's done for my life. Awesome. You know, I can't preach it without talking about the pain and the suffering that I've been in.
Yeah.
And the hardships and the sin that I've been in. And so I'm very transparent when I speak. And it's brought some pushback. I remember when I was a youth pastor here in Waterville.
Yeah.
I had a student, love her to death. But I was very, very vulnerable about my pornography addiction. And she came up to me and she said, Travis, I just don't think I can view you the same.
Wow.
And I said, good. However you were viewing me,
yeah,
you shouldn't have been viewing me that way anyways.
Yeah.
You know, and what that started to do, especially in our students, is it unlocked something. It showed them, look, Travis isn't this, like, amazing man that makes no mistakes. Right. You know, like, I'm not the Messiah. I'm not Jesus Christ. And our pastors need to stop pretending like they are. You know?
That's a great point.
And that's a really hard thing to say, and it's a really hard thing to hear. But the reality is we have pastors who act like they don't sin.
Right.
And then years later, an article gets written about them, a podcast gets made about them, a documentary gets made about them, and we go, oh my goodness, they're men.
Yeah.
Or they're women.
Right.
They made mistakes.
Yeah.
But because we don't talk about it. I think if there was a theme for this podcast, it's talk about the untalkable.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, seriously.
Like talk about what we don't talk about. If we just talked about it,
right,
it wouldn't be an issue.
Yeah.
Like, you still have mistakes. You still have issues.
Right.
But it wouldn't be as surprising.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be as hard.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm very vulnerable. But yeah, I've seen that with the Asbury revivals, you know, and just what they've done in other areas, where people are just being more open to the Spirit. They're being open to allowing God to kind of take that scalpel and pull out some of that pain. And it hurts, but it's good.
Yeah. I remember there's just so much in there. And I mean, we had talked about, you know, we don't want this podcast to go on forever, but I do, like, this is so we're gonna have you on again sometime. But I've been in situations, like, in a big setting, whether it's, you know, a public setting, whether it's 15 people or 300 or tens of thousands, where there's a call to repentance. And I'm just a bad person, so I always have something to repent of. And when I publicly do that, and it doesn't have to be me standing up in front of the crowd, but when I'm repenting in my own heart with people around me,
right,
there's this power that comes with that. Because when you take, like, whatever you have in your life that's in the darkness and bring it to the light, it dies.
Yeah.
And you might have to do that every day for the rest of your life. But, like, when I tell my wife about stuff, when I tell my friends about stuff, when I tell my accountability partners about stuff, the power that sin has over me just disappears. And I mean, I'm preaching to myself, but I wish more of us would do that, myself included.
Right.
I was talking to someone recently just about how the world doesn't need more self-centered, cool youth pastors.
No.
Like, that is the last thing that we need.
Absolutely.
And hopefully someday there's not a podcast called the Josh Brooks Podcast dedicated to my fall and my demise. You know, like,
the rise and fall of the Josh Brooks Podcast.
Could totally happen. We've come so far. Episode 1 canceled. But I just think about, like, we talk about this with our students, but then I look at my own life, and I'm like, man, well, that anyone's capable of doing anything.
Absolutely.
And I haven't done anything yet to tarnish my witness or get myself in any church trouble or legal trouble. But I, as a human being, am not far from it.
Yeah.
Satan can tempt anyone. But in the same regards, God can redeem and use anyone. And so it's important to be careful.
I agree. I think the biggest thing I try to strive for is make sure what I do is not who I am. Does that make sense? Like, I try my best to make sure that me as a pastor isn't wrapped around my personality.
Yeah.
Because when I leave, and seasons are a normal part of life, you know, and so there are some pastors that will be at the church for 50, 60 plus years.
Sure, yeah.
That's awesome. There are some pastors that are there for 5 years and they move on. So when I leave, I'm hoping that God did some awesome stuff in the time that I was there. And I don't want it to be tied to Travis. I want it to be tied to God.
Yeah. It's a great point.
So that if someone ever tries to write a podcast, The Rise and Fall of Travis Nicholson, they're like, who's Travis? No one knows who that is.
Yeah, right, exactly.
You know, because all they can spot is all the stuff that God did through Travis. But they don't, Travis had nothing to do with it.
I would love that. Yeah. Someone told me recently, there's some quote, which is basically like, preach the gospel, die, and be forgotten.
Yes.
Dude, I would much rather that than end up like one of these guys on a platform who one day the whole truth comes out. I would probably rather not be a pastor than for that to be my demise. That would I'd rather, work at Subway as a sandwich artist for the rest of my life than have that sort of demise and just serve God faithfully in the local church.
I mean, the only thing worse than that would be to be such a great Subway sandwich artist that you become nationally known and then everything comes out anyways.
The rise and fall of the Subway sandwich artist. Could you imagine? What would you, I don't even think about what you'd have to do to get a documentary.
I mean, that's not too hard to think.
Netflix miniseries.
Just think of the Subway spokesperson, Jared.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So there already is one.
There already is one.
There's already a story. Oh, my word. So ministry-wise, what are you doing right now?
Ministry-wise right now...
are people like, so you're not a pastor anymore, right? So what are we doing?
I do get that sometimes. Yeah. People being like, so you're not a pastor anymore. Because for those that don't know, I am what's called the District Youth Director of the Northern New England Assemblies of God. And so what that basically means, if you really get down to the nitty-gritty of it, is I am just a friend to our youth pastors in Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire. Like, that's what I try to drill home. I'm not their leader. I am not in charge of them. I'm just here to support them. In fact, today I met with a youth pastor here in the Waterville area just to talk. Yeah. Just to talk. Be an ear for them to listen. Be a friend. Because that's what we need more of in ministries. We need friends. It gets lonely. It doesn't have to be lonely. And so that's what I strive to do. But I do get that. People being like, so... when are you going to be a real pastor again?
I quit.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's great.
Yeah, I found it boring. But, I pastor pastors. Yeah. Is probably the best way to look at it. But for me, even in churches, a pastor should be a friend to the church people. And so I always just try to be the best friend I can be. So what my job entails is really resourcing and supporting youth pastors and youth leaders, kids pastors, kids leaders. And then it also means putting on events for teenagers. So we have youth camps, kids camps. You, I think, attended one of our youth conventions once.
Yeah, I just found it. I was looking through an old phone. I found an old picture of it. Yeah. It was awesome.
And then we also, really work through discipleship. And one of the biggest ways we work through discipleship is getting students to realize that missions, being missional is really the heartbeat of who God is. We weren't created to, we were created to give God glory. That's why we were created, was to be in relationship with God. Yeah. When Adam and Eve ate of the apple, they separated that relationship with God. And since then, God's been pursuing us. And throughout creation, sometimes that creation pursues them back. And so the idea is that now we're showing people, hey, look, it's not just about us pursuing God by ourselves, but it's bringing everyone we can along with us. And so we help support missions through something called Boys and Girls Missionary Challenge, which is BGMC, and then Speed the Light, or STL. So if you see those letters, that's what those are.
That's so cool. It's I think a lot of people don't realize how important of a role that is to support churches, especially in a place like New England. Like, I don't know... maybe Alaska. I don't know of a place in America more lonely to do ministry sometimes than New England. And then you take a place like northern New England.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are concerts and there are like even I think today or tomorrow, Francis Chan is speaking with leaders at this really small conference just for leaders, just a kind of a small thing.
Yes.
It's going to lead into a bigger thing today or tomorrow. But it's in Massachusetts, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a little long to justify a drive for just a few hours. I really thought about it because I love Francis Chan.
Don't blame me.
But my point is, like, up here it can get lonely, and so having people like you that support us is incredible. And one of the most amazing things, I think, is you work with Assemblies of God.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not Assemblies of God. Eric Brown, who works up here with Word of Life, we don't use Word of Life's curriculum,
Right.
but he still meets with me and still gives me counsel.
Yeah.
And so the fact that there are people in those positions basically really holding up the local church and holding up pastors and supporting them. Of course, God's doing that primarily.
For sure.
But just even able to have a conversation like this or go grab some food is imperative for the growth and survival of the local church because we don't get a lot of support up here.
Yeah. We've seen an increase of non-AG youth pastors and youth leaders wanting to be a part of what we're doing because
so cool.
They see that, that relationship matters.
Right.
And I'm not one of those people that Assemblies of God is the only way. No.
Right.
I'm full on, like, we're in this together. I don't care if you're Baptist. I don't care if you're Lutheran. I don't care if you're Presbyterian.
Presbyterians.
Yeah. But, like, as long as you are really, as long as you're preaching the true word and the true gospel of Jesus Christ, I want to partner with you. And I want to make sure you don't feel alone.
That's awesome.
Like, that's how it should be. Once again, if the church stopped playing this game of, it's just us. We're in this, we're in this city alone and we got a barricade and when we're going against the flames of hell itself.
Yeah.
Just us.
Right.
No. You have a church literally across the street from you.
Exactly.
Walk across there, introduce yourself.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you're going to be able to do a lot more for this community than you ever would be able to by yourself.
Yeah. That's one thing, and I don't want to go on a tirade here. I don't want to get canceled by the local church. But church plants, I love church plants.
Yeah.
Churches need to be planted. But when you take a big, huge, massive corporate name of a church and plant it in the middle of like 10, 15 churches that have been there for 60, 70, 100 years, it's a little bit like insulting almost.
It can be.
And they have $1 million budgets and marketing, which is nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But a lot of them come in without even talking to the local pastors about, hey, what has worked here? What hasn't worked here? How can we help? Is there a way that our denomination or our big corporate name could help support what you're doing right now? Because inevitably, those churches that are already built up in their name are pulling from the churches that have been there for 60,
Absolutely.
70, 100 years. And so you need church plants, but they got to be strategic.
Yeah, and once again, it comes back to relationships. Because really, what's the one thing that those church plants aren't doing? They're not building relationships with the local churches that already exist.
Yeah.
Because if they did, then they would know, like, oh, hey, if you plant this church, those people that just came to your church are actually from my church.
Right.
Which is okay. But I just want to let you know you're growing your church by church people and not by the community. Yeah. So you're not really making the change that you think you're making in this community. And I think that's because that's also not healthy.
Yeah.
Like, we don't just need a bunch of buildings with people in them that are switching, from week to week.
Yeah.
Like, if you have 10 churches in your community, that community should be feeling the impact of your churches.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It is bizarre, like we talked about before, with marriage.
Yeah.
Like, Christians should be setting the temperature and the tones for their communities. And I think, like we were talking about off camera earlier, I think it's important, even more so now than before, that pastors are not just pastors at their churches, but they're also leaders in their community.
Yeah.
And one thing I know some people might agree with this, might not agree with this. I work for the church. The one that I'm at primarily just happens to sign my checks.
Absolutely.
And so there are camps in the area. Hey, could you come up, do some speaking? Hey, could you help us out with music? And my church is very, very gracious because they believe in camp ministry.
Yeah.
A lot of the people at my church have been to camp ministry. They were saved through camp ministry. And so we see the value in that. And it's not just a ploy of how many kids can we get to come from the camp to our church, but how can we benefit the local community, which will then benefit us in return.
Yeah. I think churches are the masters of the alternate motive. I'm thinking of a different word, but I can't say it.
Yeah. Ulterior.
Yeah, that's it.
I don't even know what that means. I just know it's the right word.
Yes, that's
I
the
really
right
don't
word.
know what it means.
It was here, but it wasn't coming out here.
The Nissan ulterior motive.
Yes. And what I mean by that is, like, I feel like churches we're great at being like, hey, we're going to do this awesome Easter egg hunt in our community, but we want you to come to our church.
Yeah.
Or, hey, we're going to open up a food pantry, but it's going to be in our church.
Yeah.
So you have to come to our church.
Right.
Or, hey, we're going to offer this, but we want to see you Sunday morning.
Yeah.
What if, crazy idea, what if we just were Jesus?
Yeah.
And we did that Easter egg hunt without saying, hey, you can come, but you have to come on Sunday.
Right.
Or without expecting anything in return.
Right.
Maybe you'll see more people come to your church because you're not expecting them to come. If you're doing something and you don't even have your church name on it, God forbid.
Yeah.
God forbid people don't know which church in the community is doing this or that a church is doing this. But maybe you just do it.
Yeah.
And then word gets out.
Right.
Oh, yeah, you know that Easter egg hunt? Yeah, that was actually from the church down the street. Oh, really? I don't think they advertised it. I don't think they... No, they didn't.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I'll have to check them out.
That'd be awesome.
Because people are so used to churches doing these things.
Right.
Just to get you in their building.
Yeah.
So how about we stop doing that?
It's almost like, hey, we'd love to have you register, give us your email. Oh, we need your email address. Well, why? So we can send you a bunch of spam emails.
Exactly.
The rest of it. It's like, no.
So we can sign you up for a newsletter that you haven't agreed to sign up for.
Right.
But that's okay because you gave us your email address.
That's like John Christ said he went to a church recently, and it was like, are you interested in becoming a Christian? Like, text to get saved. And I was like, what? No, it's not. It's not how this works. Like, text to get saved. Oh, okay.
Interesting.
Yeah. We did trunk or treat.
Yeah.
For the first time ever this year.
Yeah.
And we weren't sure how our church would respond to it. We're a little bit more conservative. We weren't sure how the community would respond to it. We're a little bit off the beaten path. And we were thrilled with the response. And fortunately, we didn't have any cars handing out apples or fruit or anything like that. Sometimes that happens.
Or razor blades.
Right? Yeah, fortunately, we actually did have a guy who showed up, and no one knew who he was. And he was like, oh, I tried to go this other trunk or treat, but I was too late. But I have all this. I have like 1,000 pieces of candy that I want to give away. And I was like, dude, I'm sorry. Like, he was there with his family, and I said, I'm sorry, we can't let you do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair.
I said, can anyone here, like, vouch for you? Do you know anyone? No, I have extra candy. Sorry.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
I was sad, but, yeah, you can't just show up and hand out candy.
Yeah, was he in a white van?
No.
The fact that you had to think about that worried me for a second.
But we handed out a schedule that had our events for the rest of the year. No questions asked. Didn't have to take one. Everything was free. Food was free. Water was free. Candy was free. We had a good time. You can come back to our church for something if you want. You don't have to. We're just here to enjoy our time together, to fellowship with one another, benefit the community. That's it. And we don't ask for anything in return.
Right.
And I think it went as well as it could have. But if it was, hey, by the way, you got to take one of these before you go through, and you have to do this, and you have to go through these hoops, it would not be a welcome event to benefit the community.
No.
It would be a ploy to benefit us.
Yeah.
And I guess the question we have to ask is, does that benefit the kingdom? If it does, then go for it. But if not, then maybe don't.
I remember growing up in Georgia, and I've seen them up here too, but there's something called Heaven's Gates, Hell's Flames.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of that?
No.
So it happens, I think, primarily in like charismatic Pentecostal type churches. But it's basically like a play that's like supposed to like really put like someone's life before them and make them think. And our church did something similar. We called it the Nightmare. And it was like this haunted house thing.
Yeah.
And we advertised it like a haunted house.
Really?
I mean, it's called the Nightmare.
Yeah.
Right? Like what, like if you're, what are you going to expect? You're going to expect a haunted house.
Yeah.
And so, and many of the people involved with it would say it was a haunted house, but it was a haunted house of reality. Like the narrator, like that's narrating, he's kind of talking you through stuff. And like the first scene you go in, the one that I was primarily in was, it was a prom night scene with a drunk driver that hits a family of 4 and kills all the people in the car, and like they're like hanging out the window, and we had like it's intense production.
Yeah.
And then you go into like an overdose drug scene.
Yeah.
And then you go into a school shooting scene, and this is like 2009, right?
Yeah.
So like school shootings weren't nearly as prevalent as they are
yeah.
now, but they were still fairly prevalent. And then you go into an abortion scene.
Wow.
Where, and it ends up being a suicide scene and all that, like, and then, like, and your response is the genuine response of most people.
Yeah.
Because they going into it with this idea of, I'm going to have a good time, I'm going to have fun with a haunted house. And then all of a sudden, they're experiencing these traumatic scenes.
Yeah.
And then the narrator's voice as you go gets deeper and deeper until you get to this one scene where you're in this garden. We had the floor raise up.
Yeah.
And as the floor was raising up, these gates were opening up, and you were coming into hell. And so you had these demons like screaming, and I mean the production. This is sweet production.
Yeah.
But the bait and switch.
Yeah.
I say all that just to say the bait and switch, that church's pool.
Yeah.
It's not fair.
Yeah.
It's not fair to the world. And we're going to be able to do a lot more good for the kingdom of God if we're just transparent and honest. Versus this bait and switch that ends up doing more harm than good.
Yeah.
Do I think people gave their lives genuinely through this? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But do I think a lot of people were traumatized?
Yeah.
And will never step foot in another church because of that experience? Also, yes.
Yeah. That's like, man, I'm still just like in shock. Like, dude, what the heck?
Dude,
like,
it's insane.
Who signed off on this idea?
It is insane, man. I could sit here all day long about this stuff that we used to do, like looking back and just be like, how in the world did we do this and get away with it? Yeah. Different day, different age, different culture.
Sure, yeah.
Those things matter.
Right.
But at the same time, like, it's just that bait and switch mentality that is prevalent in the church.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important. I mean, just, Christians need to be Christ-like.
Yeah.
And we can't exploit people's experiences or emotions and then say, oh, it's for the sake of the gospel.
Right.
Like, we need to love like Christ loved just because.
Yeah. Bar none, period.
That's the reason why. Yeah. And I think if we do that, we'd see a lot more effective ministry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, Travis.
Yeah.
It's incredible just to talk about some of our ministry experiences and honestly where the American church is headed for the next 100 years. If we have that long, we'll see. Maybe we'll get canceled. The whole church, done. You're not allowed to meet.
Well, and I think that's people's fear. But I'm optimistic of the church.
Yeah.
You look at church throughout the ages, and it's always persevered.
Amen.
And so regardless of what comes down the pipeline, regardless, can the church do better in some aspects? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But we're doing the best we can.
Yeah.
And the church will always persevere regardless of what comes down because we don't serve man, we serve God.
Exactly.
And God's always going to be victorious.
Great way to look at it. All right, we will see you guys soon. Be on the lookout for episode 2, probably in 3 to 6 months.
Great release schedule.
Yeah, we'd love to have you on again. There's so much we didn't cover with Travis.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about Atlanta, what ministry like there is like. I'd love to hear about your opinions on even stuff like the Passion Conference, revival, like you said, what the future of Christianity in America looks like, and all kinds of stuff. So look forward to hearing from you some more.
For sure, man. Can't wait.
All right. Thank you.